Chapter 1. The Eater of Mirius. The darkness of the lowest dungeon was not empty. It pressed against his skin like a physical weight, breathless and suffocating. But for Ember, the darkness was the only kindness he had known for 10 years. In the dark, no one could see the gray pallor of his skin. In the dark, the terrifying, spiderweb-like black veins that pulsed beneath his flesh were hidden. In the dark, he was just a man, not a monster. Ember sat curled in the corner of his stone cell, his knees pulled to his chest. He was shivering, though the air was stagnant. The cold didn't come from the stone floor. It came from inside him. It was the chill of the void. He was born into the minor nobility of Mirius, a lush province known for its vineyards and sunlight. He remembered the sun. He remembered the feeling of it on his face, the way it warmed the earth. But mostly, he remembered the day the sun went away. He had been 12. Just a child presenting early as an omega. But instead of a sweet scent of flowers or vanilla, Ember had presented with the smell of wet ash and the sudden, vacuum-like sensation of the air leaving the room. He had reached out to his mother, seeking comfort from the fever that racked his small body. "Mama, I'm cold," he had whispered. He remembered her smile. He remembered her hand cupping his cheek. And then he remembered the scream. The void within him had stirred, a ravenous, open mouth in his soul that didn't crave food or water, but life. In mere seconds, it had sucked the warmth, the mana, and the very life from his mother. She had fallen, a shell, while Ember watched, his face flushed with a power that wasn't his own, as the black veins burst forth upon his skin for the first time. His father had tried to hold him back. The guards had attempted to restrain him. By the time the royal mages had arrived to calm him with dampening collars and iron chains, Ember had unwittingly sucked the life from half the manor staff. They didn't hang him. The High Mage had been far too intrigued by the anomaly. A mana leech, they had named him, a void-touched omega, a being that went against the natural order of life-giving. Ember only took. So they threw him here, in the bowels of the capital's prison, forgotten by the world, erased from the records. For 10 years he had sat in this cell. He refused to touch the guards who slid his tray of water under the door. He refused to speak lest his breath steal the air from the room. He withered away, his body consuming its own muscle and bone to feed the insatiable hunger of the void because he refused to feed it with another life. He was a skeleton wrapped in gray skin, a ghost haunting his own body. His name had been scrubbed from every official record, surviving only in the hushed archives of forbidden BL stories, those illicit, secret chronicles of cursed mates and volatile bonds that the palace scholars kept under lock and key, fearing the power of such dark unions. To the world, he was a myth of the macabre. To himself, he was simply waiting for the end. The clicking of heels on stone echoed down the corridor. Ember raised his head. The action made his neck protest. Creaked. No one wore heels down here. The jailers wore heavy boots. The mages wore soft slippers. Heels indicated nobility. The iron door screeched, a sound like a dying animal, and light spilled into the cell. Ember winced, covering his eyes with a bony arm. The brightness seared. "So," a woman's voice sliced through the stagnant air. It was crisp, refined, and completely lacking in warmth. "This is what is left of the Mirius air." Ember's eyes adjusted. A woman stood in the doorway, bathed in the light of the magical torch held by a shaking guard. She was a tall woman. She wore a dress of deep crimson velvet, a high collar of black lace, and a crown of dark iron resting on stern, silver-streaked hair. Queen Mother Venetia. Ember had never seen her in person, but he knew the face from the coins he used to handle as a child. She was older now, the lines around her mouth etched deeper with cruelty, but the eyes were the same, predatory. "Your Majesty," the guard stammered, staying well back from the cell threshold. "Please do not go closer. The prisoner. The air around him is dangerous." Venetia ignored him. She stepped into the cell, her nose wrinkling at the smell of damp and decay. She looked down at Ember as if he were a rotted piece of fruit she had found in her pantry. "Stand up," she commanded. Ember tried. He really did. He pushed his hands against the floor, his limbs trembling with the effort. He was so weak. His magic, denied any external source of fuel, had cannibalized his strength. He managed to get to his knees before his legs gave out. Pathetic, Venetia murmured. She tapped her cane against the stone floor. This is the monster the mages whispered about? The devourer? You look like a stiff breeze would shatter you. I. Ember's voice was a rasp, unused for months. I am safe, if I am weak. Venetia's eyebrows rose. Safe, she laughed, a harsh barking sound. I have no use for safe things, boy. Safe things are boring. Safe things are useless. She took a step closer. Ember scrambled backward, pressing his spine against the cold wall. Don't, he gasped, holding up his hands, palms out. The black veins on his forearms throbbed slowly. Don't come any closer. I can't control it. If I touch you, you'll kill me? Venetia supplied for him. She didn't look scared. She looked thrilled. You'll drain my magic, stop my heart, and leave me a shriveled up husk? Just like you did to your mother. The meanness of the words cut Ember worse than any lash. He doubled over, hiding his face in his knees. I didn't mean to, he sobbed pitifully. I don't care what you meant to do, Venetia spat. I care about what you can do. She called to the guard. Unlock his chains. Bring him to the preparation chambers. Preparation. Ember looked up, his confusion battling with his fear. Are you going to execute me? Execute me? Venetia smiled, and it was the most frightening thing Ember had ever seen. It was a smile of pure, unadulterated evil. No, little monster, you are to be married. The transition from the dungeon to the upper levels of the palace was a blur of terror. Ember was blindfolded and shackled, dragged by guards who wore thick leather gloves and refused to look at him. He was taken to a bath chamber that smelled of lavender and steam, scents so foreign to him that they made him dizzy. The blindfold was removed, and for the first time in a decade, Ember saw himself in a full-length mirror. He gasped, a sound of pure horror. He was aware of his thinness. He was aware of his illness. But it was a nightmare to see his reflection staring back at him. He had a jawline that could shatter glass and skin the color of old parchment that was pulled taut over sharp cheekbones. His irises appeared abnormally large and black, and his eyes were sunken into deep, dark hollows. The veins, however, were the worst. They weren't limited to his arms. Like a crack in a porcelain doll, they spidered across his left cheek, up his neck, and across his chest. A faint, sickly dark light pulsed through them. He appeared to be a reanimated corpse that had not been given life. Unwanted, he muttered to the mirror. Unlovable. The servants assigned to clean him were weeping. They were terrified. They used long-handled brushes to scrub the grime from his skin, flinching every time Ember shifted his weight. I won't hurt you, Ember said softly, though his voice frightened them more. Just stay back. I don't want to hurt anyone. They didn't believe him. They hurried through the washing, dumping buckets of scented water over him from a distance, as if he were a burning building they were trying to extinguish. When he was clean, or as clean as a cursed thing could be, the Queen Mother returned. She dismissed the servants with a wave of her hand. Before the servants could dress him, she said matter-of-factly, You are hideous, while gazing at his bare torso. A living cemetery. It's flawless. In an attempt to conceal the dark veins and protruding ribs, Ember encircled himself with his arms. Why? He inquired, his voice becoming slightly stronger due to his perplexity. Why would you want to marry me? Who would want me? Is this the groom's punishment? A penalty? Venetia laughed. She skirted him, examining him as though he were a prize horse headed to the glue factory. Oh, that's right. It's a penalty. A sentence. Leaning on her cane, she came to a stop before him. King Camille, have you heard of my son? Ember gave a slow nod. Whispers were heard even in the dungeon. King of the Sun. The Alpha was so powerful that he radiated it. They claimed that by burning entire battalions with a single wave of his hand, he had put an end to the Northern War. My son is challenging, Venetia uttered, her voice brimming with bittersweetness. He's too strong. Like a star, his body generates energy. Ember, he burns. No one can touch him because he burns so hot. Who was his last fiancé? An alpha from the highlands, sweet and strong? During the courtship, she reached for his hand, but her spirit was crushed and her hand was scarred by the intensity of his aura. Any normal soul cannot handle him. He is alone, Venetia continued. He is touch-starved, miserable, and volatile. He thinks he is cursed. And you want me to? Ember trailed off, the realization dawning on him with the weight of a collapsing ceiling. I want you to hold his hand, Venetia said simply. At the wedding ceremony today, the seal of flesh is required by law. He must take your hand, skin to skin, to finalize the union. He will burn me, Ember whispered. If he touches me, I will burn. Yes, Venetia smiled with bright eyes. You're going to burn, definitely, and as you burn, your void will start freaking out. It will try taking him away by force. You will be a vamp trying to suck the sun. And in the madness of that moment, one of two things will happen. Either he will burn you to a crisp right away, thus scaring him even more and showing that he is not the one who should be in charge. She whispered in his ear, or you will suck all his blood. You will devour his heart completely before he can break free. The king is doomed in both scenarios. The monster is taken off the throne in both cases, and I have to help his younger brother until he's old enough. Ember's stomach turned. It was far beyond just a wedding. It was a death sentence. A mother was engineering a murder pact with her child. I can't do this, Ember said, his voice trembling. I cannot do it. I refuse to kill him. Venetia sighed, as though she were extremely bored. I guess I knew you were going to say that. I can see that look in your eyes. The look of someone who is willing to suffer for their beliefs. She snapped her fingers, and two guards appeared, dragging between them a little girl. She was no more than 10, dressed in the simple clothes of a scullery maid. Her face was full of fear. This is the daughter of the jailer who brought you water for the last 5 years, Venetia explained. A sweet thing. She even sometimes brings you extra crusts of bread, doesn't she? Ember's heart stopped. He recognized her. Sometimes, a small hand would slide a flower or an extra ration under his door. A small kindness in a world of dark. Venetia told Ember to touch her. No. Ember shouted, running away from her. Touch her, and I'll have my guards slit her throat right here. Venetia told them sternly, but her tone was calm. Or you can agree to the wedding. You can agree to walk down the aisle, take the king's hand, and let nature take its course. If you die, you die. If he dies, he dies. But this girl lives. Ember turned to the girl. She was sobbing, trembling in the guard's grasp. She was vibrant, full of potential. All the things he was not. He stared at his hands, thin as bones, pale, black veins showed through the skin. He was already dead. He had died in his soul 10 years ago. What difference does it make when the corpse finally catches up with the soul? If the king decides to burn him, at least the cold inside him will go away. I will, Ember breathed. Release her. Venetia signaled the guard, who shoved the girl out the door. She darted past the cell bars and threw herself on the ground. But Ember didn't try to hold her. He stepped forward only to say one word. Run, Lyra, he whispered. His voice was breaking. He looked at the frightened girl. I swear, I will come back for you, but just run. The girl paused for a fraction of a second, her eyes widening at hearing her name, before fleeing into the dark. Venetia smiled. Wise choice. The wedding attire was a mockery. It was a tunic of the purest white silk, embroidered with silver threads that formed the royal crest of the sun. It was designed for a healthy, glowing Omega. On Ember, it hung loosely, emphasizing the sharpness of his collarbones and the unnatural thinness of his frame. The white fabric made his gray skin look sickly, almost green in the torchlight. They draped a heavy cloak over his shoulders, pinned with a gold brooch. The weight of it nearly buckled his knees. Stand up straight, Venetia hissed from the doorway. Try to look like a consort, not a corpse. Ember stared into the mirror one last time. He didn't see a groom. He saw a sacrifice. A lamb wrapped in silk, walking toward a butcher. It is time, the guard announced. Ember walked. This time it was not necessary to forcibly drag him. He seemed to have become so used to not striding that he took slow, shuffling steps like someone who had forgotten to walk normally. Each step was hard work. They led him through the elaborate halls of the palace. He could hear the crowd even before he saw them. The great cathedral was full to the brim. The first thing that hit him was the smell. A mixture of 1,000 people, perfume, sweat, excitement. And under it all, he sensed something else. Burning air, hot metal. It was the scent of the Alpha. It was the scent of the sun. Ember paused in front of the huge oak doors of the cathedral. His heart pounded against his chest, wildly, like a frightened bird singing. "Open them," Venetia commanded. The doors groaned open. The sound of the crowd died instantly. Thousands of eyes turned to look at the back of the church. Ember stepped into the light. He heard the gasps. He heard the whispers ripple through the pews like a wave. "Look at him. Is he ill? He looks like death. Why is he so broken? That's the Mirius heir? The cursed one. The mother insults the king with this gift." Ember kept his eyes fixed on the floor. He focused on putting one foot in front of the other. Left, right, breathe, left, right. The walk seemed to take an eternity. The aisle was a mile long, but finally he reached the steps of the altar. He sensed the presence before he saw him. The heat hitting him was physical, like opening the door to a furnace. Ember slowly raised his head. King Camel was standing at the altar. The king was gigantic, a real Alpha Prime, broad, shouldered and tall. But Camel was inside armor. Not the armor of a ceremony, but heavy, functional plates of dull gray metal with glowing containment runes inscribed on them. He had a helmet on that covered his face, but the visor was lifted blinding eyes of molten gold, and he looked mad. The king's hands were in thick, insulated gauntlets. He was brimming with a suppressed energy. The air around him was shimmering, light was distorted. Camel glanced at Ember. He was looking at the gray skin, the black veins on Ember's neck pulsing, and the way the wedding tunic was hanging off his thin body. Ember braced himself for the disgust. He waited for the king to recoil, to shout, to demand this broken thing be removed from his sight. But the king didn't recoil. The golden eyes narrowed, scanning Ember's face. And then, Camel leaned down, his voice a low rumble that only Ember could hear over the soft music. "You are shaking," the king said. Ember blinked. My mother did this," Camel growled, the heat around him spiking with his anger. "She pulled you from the dark and dressed you in silk to mock me." "Your Majesty," Ember whispered. "I am." "Do not speak," Camel commanded, though his tone wasn't cruel. It was urgent. "Listen to me, Omega. This is a trap. You know this." "Yes," Ember breathed. "When the priest asks for the seal," Camel whispered, his jaw tight, "do not touch me. I will not remove my gauntlet. I will cause a scene. I will claim the law is outdated. I will do anything to keep from touching you." Ember looked at the king, stunned. "Why?" "If I touch you," Camel whispered, his eyes a pool of sorrowful resolve, "you will die. My skin is fire. You are paper. I cannot bear to be the cause of your death." Ember experienced an unusual feeling in his chest. It was not the void. It was warmth, emotional warmth. For the first time in 10 years, somebody was going to protect him. The terror amongst them, the fiery Alpha, was going to save the creature of the void. "We have come together," the high priest shouted, the sound of his voice bouncing around the room with the decorated ceiling, "to unite the House of the Sun with the House of the Void." Queen Mother Venetia stood next to the altar, observing very closely. She met Ember's gaze. She tapped her finger on her throat, a silent message about the girl in the dungeon. "Touch him or she dies." Ember looked back at Camel. The king was bracing himself to fight the priest, to fight the law, to save Ember. "The seal of flesh is required," the priest announced. "King Camel, remove your gauntlet." "No," Camel said loudly, his voice booming through the hall. "I will not," the crowd murmured. "It is the law," the priest insisted. "The law does not require me to murder my betrothed on the altar," Camel shouted. "I can seal the marriage with a glove. Proceed." Venetia's voice was a sharp blade that cut through the din. "I challenge it." Without hesitation, she reached out. The crown's customs are unquestionable. If the king is not able to have physical contact with his consort, he doesn't have the right to rule. Unless, she gave a sly look, unless he's scared? Camel fumed, and the temperature ignited as he shouted, "I'm defending him!" At the same time, a tapestry that was hanging near the altar started to get scorched and blackened as the crowd panicked and screamed while pulling away. "Do it, Camel," Venetia ordered. "Otherwise, I will have him executed for treason right here. For refusing the king." Camel's whole body went stiff. His eyes, which were golden, stared at Ember, and helplessness was mixed with anger. He was cornered. Ember moved closer. The temperature was so high that it was beginning to dry his eyes and the prickle of his skin, but still, he wasn't frightened. "Don't be scared," Ember said very quietly. "Don't be ridiculous," Camel said very quietly. "I'll burn you to ashes." "I don't think you will," Ember said in a very soft voice. Deep inside him, he could feel the void awakening. Felt the energy. It felt the feast. At that moment, the hunger for the first time did not seem like a void. Instead, it felt like a mouth opening wide to let out a scream. "Detection risk. Low moderate, trust me," Ember said. Ember didn't pull away. He stood his ground as Camel, driven by a desperate need to save the hostage girl, reached for his own armor. As the gauntlet hit the floor with a heavy clang, Ember met the king halfway, thrusting his cold, gray hand into the burning grip. The crowd screamed. Camel shouted, trying to yank his hand away, expecting the smell of burning flesh, expecting Ember to turn to ash in his grip. But there was no scream of pain. There was a sound like a thunderclap, a massive, deafening boom of energy connecting. Camel's eyes went wide. He stared at their joined hands. His hand wasn't burning Ember. Ember was drinking him. The terrifying, blinding light pouring off Camel's skin rushed into Ember's palm like water down a drain. The void inhaled. It took the pain, the heat, the radiation, the centuries of cursed energy, and it swallowed it whole. And then the change began. The gray hue that covered Ember's arm first turned pink. Then it gradually transformed into a vibrant, healthy cream. The muscle fibers under the skin were mending themselves and swelling with energy. Those black veins that had appeared as if they were rotting suddenly lit up. They didn't vanish. They turned into gold. Bright, molten gold flowing through his skin like liquid sunlight. The energy streamed up Ember's arm, striking his chest, his heart, and his face. His sunken cheeks got filled. The dark circles under his eyes disappeared. His dull, brittle hair was growing, becoming longer and changing from ash, gray into a shimmering, iridescent silver. Ember threw his head back and gasped, not from pain, but from pleasure. It was the first full breath he had taken in 10 years. He was not only alive, he was a god. Camel stood frozen, watching the transformation. He felt his own body cooling. The constant, agonizing pressure in his veins was gone. The heat that had isolated him for his entire life was flowing out of him, harmlessly absorbed by the creature holding his hand. Ember squeezed Camel's hand. His grip was no longer weak. It was strong, iron strong. Ember opened his eyes. They were no longer black pits. They were glowing with the same golden fire as the king's, swirling with power. The silence in the cathedral was absolute. Ember looked at his other hand, watching the gold light pulse beneath his skin. He looked at the Queen Mother, whose face had gone white with terror. Then he looked up at Camel. A slow, beautiful smile spread across Ember's face. "More," Ember whispered, his voice resonating with a new, terrifying power. "Please, Alpha, give me more." Chapter 2. The Circuit. The only sound that marked the end of the silence in the great cathedral was not a scream but the Queen Mother's voice. Venetia screamed, "Get him!" She hardly managed to mask the terror in her voice. She pointed with a shaking finger to the altar, to the glowing, golden figure that was there a moment after the broken man. "He's a warlock. He's stealing the king's soul. Kill him before he drains the monarch dry." The royal guard was at a loss. They were trained to face armies, wild beasts, and assassins. They had not been trained to face a miracle. They turned their gazes from the screaming dowager queen to their king, who was motionless, with his hand grasped by the glowing Omega. Camel didn't look like he was dying. For the first time in his 28 years, he didn't look like he was in agonizing pain. The perpetual grimace of concentration, the sheer effort it took to keep his explosive energy from incinerating the room, was gone. His face was slack with shock, his golden eyes wide and unblinking. "I said kill him," Venetia screamed, grabbing a spear from the nearest guard. "He is eating him." "Stop," Camel said. It wasn't a shout. It was a word spoken with the quiet, absolute authority of a man who no longer needed to scream to be heard over the roar of his own power. The king turned his head slowly. The movement was fluid, no longer stiff with the tension of holding back. He looked at his mother. Then he looked at the guards. "Stand down," ordered Camel. "If anyone comes near my consort, they die." Ember was right next to him, breathing heavily. The air smelled sweet. He glanced at his own hands. The skin was pink and plump, the nails smooth and strong. The black veins that had branded him a beast were now flowing gold rivers, alive and pulsing in rhythm with Camel's heartbeat. He was a bit drunk, dazed, the banquet of raw power after 10 years of starving. He looked at Venetia, the woman who had pulled him out of the darkness, who had threatened a child to force him here. Ember felt a rush of some hot and strange thing in his chest. This was not fear. It was anger, and this time he had the power to contain it. "I am not eating his soul, Mother," Ember said. His voice was no longer a rasp. It was clear, melodic, and resonated with a strange, harmonic sound that vibrated in the teeth of everyone in the front row. "I am carrying his burden." Venetia took a step back, the spear clattering from her grip. "Impossible," she whispered. "You were a corpse. You were." "Empty," Ember finished with a sigh. He squeezed Camel's hand, and at the same time, he felt the king's surplus energy flowing through him like a river running into the vast sea. Camel seemed to come to his senses from the trance. He looked down at Ember, his features changing from surprise to a fiercely protective, almost overwhelming love. Suddenly he noticed that Ember was still in the groom's tunic, which was loose and not really fitting him anymore. It was now slipping off his newly healthy shoulders and revealing the glowing tattoos on his collarbones. "The ceremony is over," Camel said in a loud voice. He let go of Ember's hand only to use his other rock, hard, armored arm to hold him tightly to his waist and bring him close to his chest. The crowd was stunned. The king never touched anyone. Chapter 3. The Sun King's Solitude. The armor was suffocating. Actually, it wasn't the metal's weight that bothered King Camel. He had worn heavy armor since he was a boy of 14 when he was trained to bear the burden of a kingdom on his shoulders. It was the heat inside that got him. Camel was in the small antechamber behind the great cathedral's altar, holding a polished silver shield and using it as a mirror in which to study his face. He didn't see a king. He saw a furnace contained in iron. The containment runes, which are a kind of magic symbol, were etched into the gray metal of his breastplate, and they were glowing with a faint, angry orange light, as if they were trying to fight against the radiation that was coming off his skin. "Your Majesty." His squire, a brave young lad named Kobin who wore thick lined gloves, cautiously came nearer. "Queen Mother wants to know if you are ready." Camel slowly looked over his shoulder. A blurry mist surrounded him, the heat haze changing the appearance of the room. "Ready," Camel echoed, his voice muffled behind the visor of his helmet. "Ready to kill an innocent?" "No, Kobin. I am not ready to." She says the procession is already on the move," Kobin murmured, moving away as Camel clenched his fist tightly. The metal of the gauntlet squeaked under the strain. Camel stared at his hands. They were weapons. Every inch of him was a weapon. Since his introduction as an Alpha Prime at 13, his gift had been a double-edged sword. He generated mana at an insanely high rate. It was so concentrated in his blood that it constantly radiated from him, like waves of blistering solar energy. He couldn't even touch a flower without making it drop dead. If he tried to stroke a dog, he would burn its fur. In fact, he was most definitely not in a position to hold the hand of an Omega. She says it's in the lower dungeons that she found him, Camel stated, the anger rising slowly in his stomach. A prisoner that has been totally forgotten. She's referring to him as the Devourer. I've heard the rumors, sire, Kobin said, looking down. People say he is... They say he is a monster who devours life. He's a man, Camel shouted. A son that my mother kept hidden from me for 10 years. And now, she is bringing him out into the light only to be burnt up by her own son. Camel walked up and down the small room, his heavy boots making the stone tiles crack with each step. He knew the game his mother played. She wanted the throne. She was unable to kill Camel herself. No poison worked on him. No assassin could have been close without being burnt. So she wanted to shatter his mind. She wanted him to kill this Omega publicly, to be so traumatized by the act that he would abdicate in favor of his younger brother, Jared, who would be easily manipulated. But I won't do it, Camel promised. I will not accept the seal. I will continue to wear the gauntlet. The high priest is loyal to her, sire, Kobin warned. He will bring up the ancient laws. The flesh has to touch to bind the magic of a crown. Then let the crown be dropped, Camel snarled. The heavy bells of the cathedral began to toll. It was time. Camel took hold of his helmet and fastened it to his head. His entire world became the tiny opening in the front of the helmet. He exited the small room and ascended the altar platform. The cathedral was a human sea. Gardens of nobility, courtiers, and successful merchants scavenged the stalls. They were fanning themselves as the heat of the room had already increased due to Camel. Their lips moved, the words not audible, and their eyes were looking at the burning king and the empty aisle. They were here for a show. One of those instances where the difficult to define monster king is burnt alive is watched by a bride. Camel was at the altar now. He stood tall like an iron statue with rage contained inside. He looked at the first row of seats. His mother was there wearing black lace. She looked more like a widow than a mother of a groom. She met his glance and smiled. The small, tight expression was a promise of suffering. Detection risk, low moderate. Do not test me, Camel, her eyes seemed to say. I have the leverage. The heavy oak doors at the back of the cathedral slowly opened with a heavy sigh. The music changed from a fanfare to a lament. A low and sorrowful tune which was played by the organ. Here comes the corpse, someone in the third row whispered loud enough for Camel to hear. Camel looked down the long, red-carpeted aisle, and he saw him for the first time. Ember. Camel's breath was caught in his throat. He had expected a monster. He had expected a wild beast that was struggling against chains. But the one who came to him was a cause of his deep sorrow. He was lost in the white silk wedding gown. The tunic was made for a healthy man, and Ember was very thin. The cloth was hanging on his shoulders, thus sharply and painfully exposing the point of his collarbones. His skin was gray, the color of wet ash, and even though Camel was quite far, he could see even then the scary black veins that were spreading from his neck to his face like cracks in a porcelain doll, eyes and mouth. He walked with a shuffle, every step clearly an effort of will. He looked like he was made of glass and dust. Gods, Camel breathed. He's very hungry. As Ember made his way closer, Camel became aware of yet another thing. He wasn't paying attention to the crowd or the guards. He was staring right at Camel, and his eyes, which were huge, black voids on his gaunt face, were not terrified. They showed resignation. He knows, thought Camel. He knows his life is over. Ember got to the dais stairs. On the first step he faltered. Camel reflexively reacted. He stepped forward, his hand reaching to catch the boy, but he pulled back just in time. Don't touch him. Before the ritual starts, you'll be the one killing him. Ember regained his balance. He looked up at Camel, breathing heavily. His breath came out with a rattle from deep within his chest. To Camel, the smell of him was not that of an Omega in heat, but it was the scent of something very old and cold. That was the scent of a storm about to break. Your Majesty, Ember spoke softly. His voice was rough and used. Camel bent his head and spoke to Ember only through the spike of his helmet. Turn back. Ember was a little shocked and his black eyes got bigger with surprise. What? Turn around and run, Camel whispered with a scary voice. Run back down the hall. There are my guards, the ones in blue, they are loyal to me. They will let you pass. Go to the stables. Take a horse. Ember shook his head slowly. A sad, small smile came on his pale lips. I am not able to run, Alpha. She has insurance. My mother. Camel's fingers tightened into a fist at his sides. What did she threaten you with? Torture? Death? You are going to death anyway. Not me, Ember whispered. The child. The jailer's daughter. She said, if I don't touch you, the girl dies. Camel felt as if he was getting frozen. The heat inside his armor spiked with fury, the metal groaning as it expanded. His mother had taken a hostage. How else could it be? She is a demon, Camel said with rage. She is thorough, Ember said with a chuckle. He straightened his back and raised his chin. Such a defiant act coming from such a weak person looked ridiculous. Yet, it deeply hurt Camel. I am ready, King Camel. Let us end this. The high priest moved ahead, holding up his staff. He seemed like a skinny, tall man who had very hard eyes. He cleared his throat so well that the crowd decided to keep quiet. We come together in this place, boomed the priest, to unify the Alpha King, the son of our realm, with his chosen mate. Camel laughed out loud. Chosen. The Omega Ember of Mirius. The priest went on. Do you still go willingly? Ember whispered, but his words filled the space. I obey the crown. And you, King Camel? The priest asked abruptly, turning his chilly gaze to the armored giant. Are you willing to take this Omega both as your burden and as your bond? Camel looked at the priest. He felt like burning him. He wanted to release the solar flare that was building up in his chest and turn into mist the lie that stood in front of him. But he looked at Ember, at the delicateness of his body, the courage in his dark eyes, and he realized there was no way out for him. If he declined, the girl would be killed and most likely Ember would be executed for treason. I accept, Camel said through clenched teeth. Then we go to the seal, the priest said. He beckoned to the cushion between them. According to the old laws of our kingdom, the magic of the Alpha and the magic of the Omega have to acknowledge each other. Skin to skin, soul to soul. The audience leaned closer. That was the moment. That was the execution. King Camel, the priest ordered, take off your gauntlet. Camel didn't do anything. The silence stretched, thick and heavy. Your Majesty, the priest said, his voice harder. The gauntlet. No, Camel said. The crowd gasped. Venetia stood up in the front row, her face twisting in a scowl. I will seal the marriage, Camel announced, his voice booming through the helmet. But I will not remove the armor. My curse is known to you all. I will not harm this young man for the sake of a dusty tradition. It is not tradition, Venetia shouted, rushing up the stairs. It is law. The magic must be bound. Camel, you don't touch him and the marriage is invalid. And if the marriage is invalid, she looked at Ember with a sharp gaze. Then the Omega is without a use to us. The threat was palpable. Useless things get thrown away. I won't do it, Camel declared, as his gloved hand touched the altar. Seal it on the steel, priest, or never. Venetia came up to the altar. She stood beside Ember, who looked hardly visible next to the armored king, but her aura was poisonous. She bent over, the sound of her voice a whisper, but it was sharp as a knife. Take off the gauntlet, Camel, she breathed, or I will send the signal to the dungeons right now. The girl will be the first to die. And then, for bewitching you, I will have this one flayed alive. Camel glanced at her, hatred simmering inside of him so fiercely that he even tasted vomit. You would wreck the kingdom just to hurt me? I am rescuing the kingdom from a monster. Venetia smiled. Now, be a good son. Camel glanced at Ember. He was shaking now. The adrenaline was running out, making him feel weak. He looked like he was about to faint, but he nodded. A very slight, barely perceptible nod. Ember mouthed, do it. An opening in Camel's heart was what he felt. That was the moment. He was going to kill him. He was going to see this unyielding, courageous, and sadly, completely misunderstood creature be completely destroyed right before his eyes, and he would have to live with the memory of those black eyes eternally. "All right," Camel yelled, his voice breaking as the energy came out of his chest. "All right." He raised his right hand while with his left he latched onto the release mechanism of the heavy containment gauntlet. The top was unsealed. The two of them were flinching at the sight of the vented steam, superheated air escaping the suit, the noise of the leak. Camel tugged the metal glove off. It hit the stone floor with a heavy clang. His hand came into view. It was a big, rough, and frightening hand. The skin was so hot that it had a dazzling, white, hot glow. The air around his fingers was instantly transformed into plasma, which shimmered in violet and blue. Just from the heat of that one unloved hand, the priest's eyebrows were singed as he fell back in horror. "Step forward, Omega," the priest said, blushing and moving backward to a safe distance. Take the king's hand." Camel offered his hand, palm up. He was trying to draw the power back, trying to reduce the energy, but the tension and anger were making it uncontrollably flare up. He was a nuclear power plant going into meltdown. "Don't," Camel said quietly, his tears of sorrow stinging his eyes behind the mask. "Ember, please." Ember didn't look at the fire. He didn't look at the deadly radiation that was curling the edges of his silk sleeve. He looked up at Camel's helmet, straight into the hidden eyes. "I am not afraid of the fire, Alpha," Ember said, his voice surprisingly steady. "I have been cold for a very long time." Ember raised his own hand. It was skeletal, gray, and shaking. The black veins on his wrist seemed to pulse faster, as if sensing the proximity of the power. It was the hand of a corpse reaching for the hand of a god. The crowd held its breath. Venetia leaned forward, eyes wide, eager for the scream. Ember's fingers brushed the superheated air surrounding Camel's palm. Camel squeezed his eyes shut, bracing for the smell of burning flesh. Ember's palm pressed flat against Camel's, and the fingers interlaced. Camel waited for the agony. He waited for Ember to convulse. He waited for the end. But there was no scream. Instead, there was a sound. A low, resonant thrum, like a massive bell being struck underwater. Camel opened his eyes. His hand wasn't burning Ember, and Ember wasn't burning. The blinding white light that usually poured off Camel's skin wasn't radiating outward anymore. It was flowing inward. It was streaming into Ember's gray hand like water rushing into a dry riverbed. "What?" Camel breathed. He looked at Ember's face. His eyes were wide, the pupils blown so large they eclipsed the black irises. His mouth was open in a silent gasp of shock. "You," Ember stuttered, looking down at their joined hands. "You taste like the sun." The energy transfer accelerated. Camel felt a sensation he had never felt in his entire life. Coolness. A blessed, rushing coolness racing up his arm, soothing the burning ache in his shoulder, his chest, his heart. It was as if Ember was a vacuum, sucking the poison out of a wound. And then the impossible happened. The black veins on Ember's wrist, the marks of the void corruption, began to change. Right before Camel's eyes, the necrotic black color receded. In its place, a brilliant molten gold began to flow. The gray, papery skin of Ember's hand flushed with a sudden vibrant pink. The wrist thickened, the bone structure smoothing out, the frailness vanishing as muscle knit together in seconds. The gold was spreading up Ember's arm, under the sleeve of the wedding tunic, racing toward his heart. "He's not dying," Camel realized, his voice shaking with awe. He looked at his mother. Venetia's triumphant smile had vanished. Her jaw was slack. She was staring at the glowing golden light that was beginning to radiate, not from Camel, but from the young man she had called a monster. Camel looked back at Ember, gripping his hand tighter. "Ember!" Ember threw his head back. The hood of his cloak fell away, and as the energy of the Sun King flooded his starving core, the devourer began to wake up. "More," Ember gasped, his voice gaining a terrifying, beautiful resonance. "Give me more." Chapter 4. The Shocking Unveil. The silence that engulfed the great cathedral was so intense that people could not hear any other noise besides their own hearts. It was like a vacuum that simultaneously sucked the air from 3,000 lungs. The focus of all the worshippers was the altar. They were anticipating the scream. They expected the smell of burning flesh. They imagined the fragile, gray-skinned creature turning to dust under the Sun King's fiery touch. However, Ember did not turn to dust. He was so frightened that his body froze where he was standing and his bony hand was still held tightly in Camel's glowing, superheated one. And instead of withdrawing, instead of screaming in pain, Ember produced a sound that was even more terrifying for the onlookers. In fact, he let out a breath. It was a long, deep breath, trembling with relief, like a diver coming up for air after holding his breath for a lifetime. Camel looked down at him, frozen with disbelief under his faceplate. He could only see through the small slit of the helmet, and he was watching the incredibly amazing thing happening. The white radiation that normally covered his skin like a halo, the energy that would melt the air and burn the stones, was completely gone. It was not being released into the air, but rather it was going into Ember. "You," Camel was gasping, his words trembling through the metal. "You are not burning." "No," Ember murmured, his eyes closing, his head falling back. "I am drinking." The feeling was beyond words. For 10 years, Ember had been an empty container, a bucket with a broken bottom, running around trying to stop the last bit of his own life force from leaking out. He had been living in a way that was nothing but constant, unbearable spiritual hunger. The void inside him had been tearing at his chest, biting his bones, craving the nourishment that he kept denying it because the price was always others' suffering. But now a river of pure, concentrated power was flowing his way. It was hot, heavy, and delicious, tasted like sunlight trapped in honey, tasted like life itself. And the void, that terrifying, bottomless beast that had defined his existence, stopped screaming. It started to purr. "Look at his arm." A noble in the front row gasped. Camel looked. The transformation had started where their hands were joined. The gray, papery skin of Ember's wrist was suddenly flushing with vibrant color. And it was not a simple color change. It was a variation in the material itself. The frailty was disappearing. The terrifying black veins that had marked Ember as a monster, the necrotic lines of the void corruption, did not go away. Instead, they flared. First at the wrist and then creeping up the forearm, the black lines turned into molten gold. They shone with a fierce, internal glow, pulsating to the rhythm of Camel's own thundering heartbeat. In the quiet hall, the sound of a low groan of fabric was heard. Ember's silk sleeve of the wedding tunic, loose and floating only seconds before, suddenly was tight against the newly formed muscle, the seams groaning as his body grew bigger. The muscle under the skin was bulging, stitching up with incredible speed. The arm, which was frozen withered, was turning strong, lean, hardly resisting the inexhaustible energy of the king. "Unbelievable!" Queen Mother Venetia yelled, her face distorted with fear. He was just a gutter, a temporary drain. Under such pressure, he must have fallen. Why is he not broken yet? 2 royal guards, somewhat hesitant but loyal to the queen, came forward, their spears at the ready. "Don't come any closer," Camel shouted. The sound of the king's voice was altered. Normally, his shouts were supported by a flash of heat that forced people to move away, a kind of physical punch through thermal pressure. On this occasion, there was no heat, only the essence and undeniably direct and authoritative power of an alpha who was guarding his own. "Sire," one guard whispered, glancing at the bright link between the 2 men. "He is attacking you." "He is rescuing me," Camel stated. He turned to Ember. The gold had reached across Ember's shoulder now. The Omega's chest was rising, growing as the lungs filled with undisturbed air. "Ember," Camel spoke hastily while holding the Omega's hand even more firmly. "What's going on with you?" Ember opened his eyes. The crowd gasped as one. The hollow, black pits were gone. Ember's eyes were now wide, bright, and swirling with a mesmerizing mix of dark and liquid gold. They were the eyes of a creature that had seen the darkness and conquered it. "I am becoming," Ember said, his voice no longer a rasping whisper. It was clear, resonant, and melodic. I was empty, Alpha. You are filling me. The energy, Camel said, feeling the frantic buzzing in his own veins quieting down. It's leaving me, the pressure, the noise in my head. It's gone. I took it. Ember smiled, and it was a beatific, terrifying expression. Do you have more? Camel laughed, a short, incredulous sound that bordered on hysterical relief. I have an infinity of it, Ember. I am cursed with it. Then I am cursed with the hunger for it, Ember replied. Don't stop. Please, don't stop. He moved toward the king by a single step. The hand that was still gray and skeletal was suddenly raised, and he put it on Camel's armored chest. The armor? Ember whispered, his face showing concern while his fingers touched the cold metal surface. Prevents the flow. The taste is stale. It is the means by which the world keeps me at a distance, Camel said, although his determination was almost gone. He was so glad for the skin contact on his right hand that it was almost like a drug, and at that very moment the armor became a prison to him which he was eager to get out of. I am, therefore, your world now, Ember answered without any elaboration. A wave of golden light rolled up Ember's chest once more. The loose collar of the wedding tunic giving way, the clavicle was exposed. The crowd was mesmerized and frozen by the sight, as the hollows of his neck were disappearing, the skin turning smooth and flawless like porcelain. The black web of veins on his throat looked less like a curse and more like the decoration of the royal jewelry that had been inlaid in his flesh when they flared gold. This is an abomination, Venetia screamed, her composure shattering completely. She grabbed the high priest's arm, shaking him. Do something. Break the bond. He is a leech, a parasite. The high priest was visibly frightened. Your Highness, the bond. The magic has accepted it. Look at the aura. He was indicating his staff. The air around the couple was flickering. However, it wasn't the fiery, scorching, Sun King heat haze that was violently destructive. It was a gentle, golden, stable, and peaceful halo. The two opposing forces, the infinite generator and the infinite void, had reached a state of equilibrium. Aura be damned, Venetia yelled. Die him. She grabbed a ceremonial dagger from the altar table. If the guards wouldn't do it, then she would. She had been in control of the throne for 20 years by tormenting her son. She was not going to allow a rat from the dungeon to spoil her reign. Venetia lunged. Ember! Camel shouted. He made an attempt to move and get in her way, but his body was still weighed down by a thick plate armor. He was too slow, but Ember was quicker. Ember's reflexes, sharpened by a sudden rush of high-grade mana, were as sharp as a whip crack. He didn't shrink. He didn't hesitate. His head turned, his shimmering silver hair flailing around like a flag. He stared at Venetia, and he let loose. Besides merely absorbing the energy, he had the ability to channel it. He took a small portion of the power that he had extracted from Camel and, with a flick of his wrist, pushed it outward. A shockwave of golden pressure radiated from Ember. It was not fire, but pure kinetic energy. It slammed Venetia as if it were a solid wall. The Queen Mother was lifted off her feet. She flew backward, the dagger spinning from her grasp, and crashed into the first row of pews with a splintering crunch of wood. The cathedral once more went stark quiet. Ember was left gasping for air, and his arm was still outstretched. His fingers had been illuminated. He glanced at his hand and then at the quartered queen, amazed at the force he had used without noticing. Ember was confused. I didn't mean to. She was going to kill you, said Camel, his tone as hard as steel. He came between Ember and the queen who was lying down to protect him. You defended yourself. You defended your king. Camel cast his eyes to the crowd. To the nobles who had come to jeer. To the courtiers who had whispered about the corpse bride. Look at him, Camel shouted, his voice echoing through the helmet. Look at your queen. He reached up and unlatched his helmet. The heavy metal bucket fell to the floor with a deafening clang. Camel shook his head, his golden hair spilling loose. His face, usually twisted in a grimace of pain and concentration, was open and fierce. He turned to Ember. Let them see you, Camel whispered. Let them see what they threw away. Ember reached up with both hands, now both fully healed, strong and elegant, and pulled the heavy hood of his cloak all the way back. The last of the gray faded from his face. His skin settled into a luminous, creamy pale tone that seemed to hold its own light. His cheekbones were high and aristocratic, his jawline sharp enough to cut. His lips, once cracked and pale, were full and flushed with blood. And the hair that was once brittle and straw, like of the prisoner, has disappeared, replaced by a silver mane that nearly sparkled with every movement and reached his shoulders. He was a kind of beauty, not a gentle, tender beauty. He was beautiful in the way a thunderstorm is beautiful or the way a tiger is beautiful. He was ugliness incarnate. The golden tattoos on his face, 3 elegant lines tracing from his temples down his neck, glowed gently. A murmur ran through the crowd. Only this time it was not mockery. It was awe. The moon, blessed. An old duke breathed in the silence. The legends spoke of a void, touched who would resemble the moon. He is not a monster. A lady in the 3rd row whispered, holding her pearls tightly. He is a god. Ember didn't care about them. He didn't care about the whispers or the awe. He only cared about the man standing in front of him. He could feel the connection between them like a physical tether. It was a hunger that went both ways. Camel needed to give, Ember needed to take. It was a perfect circle. Your Majesty, Ember said, stepping closer, ignoring the hundreds of watching eyes. The armor, it's still in the way. Camel looked down at him. The desire in the king's eyes was naked and raw. It wasn't just lust. It was the desperation of a man who had been drowning and had finally found air. If I take it off, Camel warned low, I won't be able to stop. The connection, it will be absolute. Good, Ember challenged him. I don't want partial. I want absolute. Ember reached out and touched the breastplate of the king's armor. Take me home, Alpha, Ember whispered, the command weaving through the magic in the air. Feed me. Camel's control snapped. He grabbed Ember's waist, pulling him flush against the metal. We leave, Camel announced to the stunned room. Now. He didn't wait for the recession. He yanked Ember down the aisle, the heavy clang of his boots mixing with the soft rustle of Ember's silk. They stormed out of the great oak doors and into the cool evening air. Camel whistled sharp and loud. His warhorse, a huge black beast named Obseiphius, came running around the corner, eyes rolling. Camel grabbed Ember by the waist and lifted him onto the saddle. Then he himself swung up, wrapping the arms and armor around Ember's waist, and for a moment burying the face in the crook of the neck just to take a deep breath of the scent of Ember. Hold on, growled Camel. He urged the horse forward at a gallop. They ran at full speed through the city streets, a shower of golden sparks falling behind them. But as the adrenaline of the confrontation faded, a new, terrifying sensation took over. Ember gasped, his hands clamping down hard on Camel's armored waist. The metal breastplate was scorching hot again, hotter than before. Camel, Ember choked out, his voice tight. The flow. It's not stopping. I know, Camel gritted out, urging the horse faster toward the castle gates. The connection. It woke something up. My levels are spiking. I can't dampen it. It feels like a dam breaking. It's too much, Ember cried out. He wasn't just drinking the overflow anymore. The void inside him, starved for 10 years, had gone into a frenzy. It was pulling at Camel's soul with violent force. And Camel, triggered by the first touch of an Omega in his life, was pouring energy into the bond like a broken reactor. Sparks flew from Ember's fingertips at the point of contact with the armor. The golden tattoos on the arms of the latter turned so blindingly bright that they emitted a radiance that was almost painful. Ember, with his hands still clutching the armor, pleaded with panic in his voice. I can't let go. Camel, I can't let go. I'm siphoning from you too fast. Almost there. Camel was not going to let the horse stop. With a slide on the ground, he pulled Ember down with him. They had a sprawl and their bodies thudded against the stone of the keep. Just as they fell together, a blast of golden radiance went out from the point of their collision, effectively breaking the window that was the closest. Camel grunted quietly, as if in pain, and his breath came in short gasps. He supported himself heavily on Ember as his body gave way to the pressure of the surge. If you saw him, you'd think he was a fever-stricken man caught in the grip of a power storm so intense that it had at last reached its breaking point. This armor, Camel said aggressively as his face twitched with frustration, desperately and unskillfully removing his breastplate. It is caging me. It's blocking the circuit. If I don't get it off, I'm going to explode. Camel, you are burning. Ember cried. The scene itself was getting hotter to a lethal level again. The perfect circuit was exceeding its limit. The metal against his back was burning him very much. We are to stop, I suppose? Stopping is not an option. Camel took a hold of Ember's cheeks so tightly that it appeared his hands were bruised. Don't you get it? You made that energy so unleashed. If I don't claim you now, if I don't claim you and ground this energy. He looked at the heavy oak doors of the keep wildly, then at Ember, his chest heaving. His shoulders, where the steam was coming from, were still hot. We might kill each other even before the bed. Camel ripped the first buckle of his armor off with a savage tear of metal, the rivet popping like a gunshot. Run, Ember! Camel shouted, voice full of desperation. Run to the chamber. I'm right behind you. Don't let me touch you till the armor is off. Ember stared at the Alpha, a terrifying, beautiful, deadly power uncontrollably spiraling out of the blue. Instead of running away, he grabbed the king's hand, raised the fingers to the light, and even bigger the circuit open. Together, Ember's eyes turned gold as he said, we burn together. The sprint from the courtyard to the west wing was a blur of heat and adrenaline. They had just jumped from Obsephus back when Camel started pulling him through the service entrance. As Camel dragged Ember to the royal chambers, the stone corridor was just a streak of gray. It wasn't running but stumbling in a desperate manner. Camel had the frightening momentum of a star that collapses. Each of his armored steps broke the marble tiles, leaving scorch marks in the form of blackened footprints. Smoke was coming out of the joints of his greaves. Clear the hall, Camel roared, his voice a distorted, metallic snarl. Get back! Everyone get back! A group of terrified servants flattened themselves against the walls, shielding their faces from the wave of dry, blistering heat that rolled off the king as he passed. The tapestries hanging on the walls withered and smoked, the fabric turning brown and brittle in seconds. Camel kicked the double doors of his chambers open with a violence that splintered the wood around the lock. He dragged Ember inside and slammed the doors shut, throwing the heavy iron bolt.
And that's where the story ends. For now. If you'd like to continue their story and listen to the extended part 2, you can find it on my Patreon. That's also where I share brand new exclusive stories every week, and where my full archive of past stories is gradually being restored. You can also support my work by checking out my standalone audiobooks and merch in my shop. All the links are in the description box. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you in the next one.